different challenges for everybody, so this is where it all happens, right here.
It's a nail biter all year.
There's a handful of guys in this class that can lay it down each weekend, and you just have to be on your A game.
Conditions were tough, hard to see.
Today was one of the hardest courses I'd ever shot in my life.
Let's have a good time! Shoot 'em up! Yesterday we had a 6-hour delay because of the rain.
The ASA does it better than anybody.
This is a big arrow right here.
And I knew coming in today I was just going to have to just throw down.
Here, dude. This tournament counts for Cheer of the Year. That got the crowd going. Here we go. Now we're seeing some rings. 14 points. Yeah. 2 in a row for Clark. This is going to be big. He got it. You see how fast he was. Yeah, she gets a win. That's how you make a move right there. I get one chance at the Classic every year, and this is it. What a shot.
4 of 5 bonus rings.
That's professional archery right there. I see your 14. Good archer right there.
Welcome, everybody, to the Competition Archery Media Podcast, where we explore all things pertaining to competition archery. I'm your host, PJ Riley, and the CAM Podcast is brought to you by O'Neill's Classic Archery. And today, we are in studio with ASA President and CAM Manager, Josh Grine.
For
Josh,
take two.
For take two, yes. We had a nice running podcast there, and then our video guy says, wait, what's his title? Cameraman. Our cameraman says, I forgot to hit record.
No, he had an equipment malfunction.
Equipment malfunction.
Very similar to archers.
Well, Josh, we just saw the hype video ahead of the ASA season, which kicks off the Hoyt Easton Pro-Am, Foley, Alabama. That video is pretty killer. If that doesn't get you excited for archery, I don't know what does.
Yeah, that was awesome. We're like a week out from Foley, so next Wednesday, 12 o'clock, practice range is open, kicks off season. Watching that video, super excited to get out of trade show season and indoor season and
outside.
Enjoy Foley, 70 degrees. A lot of rain this week, so hopefully it gets out of its system. Registration looks great so far. We are at a higher mark than we've ever been with pre-registration. So excited about the outcome or the turnout that we'll have in Foley and just ready to be down there.
So I just want to make sure that none of the archers eat at any of the shrimp or barbecue places I like, because I don't want to wait in the line.
No, we're not going to tell any names.
Yeah, just stay away. You know, maybe folks should travel outside of town to go eat or something, like go to the next town over.
Go to Florida.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of good restaurants in Pensacola.
Shrimp and barbecue, I can't wait. I'm not going to eat for the next week just so I can load up there.
So to change subjects from you and your food and non-sweet iced tea, and they always make fun of you down there for ordering that. One of the reasons we're doing this podcast and starting off is because we'll just say it largely revolves around social media, right? Because there's some new stuff. We're coming up to a season. It's fitting time to do it. But what really spurred this on was, for those of you listening, I don't like social media. I mean, I despise social media. I only use social media when we're at events and I have to, or there's an event going on. We need scores and photos and that kind of stuff.
The world needs more Josh Grine selfies at the gas station.
No, and there's value. But listen, I'm more into like the Instagrams, the YouTubes. I like to see what's happening and get my information. Where I really kind of have gotten away from social media is the dialogues. And it's just because there's so much said. And, you know, I was talking to somebody, I don't want to throw him under the bus, Darren Christian Berry, but he summed it up really well. You know, he said it has given everybody a platform to voice their opinion without fear of getting punched in the mouth, right? And that is my view of social media. There's so much, you know, for a community in archery that hates misinformation so much, man, we abuse it on social media. Like, and there's just a lot of stuff, and I miss it, but it doesn't mean that I'm ignorant to it.
Right.
Because I have somebody like you who PJ doesn't miss anything on social media, and I'll be getting ready to bed, and PJ will send me a screenshot. Did you see this? And that actually happened the other night. And I was like, hey, let's do a podcast and talk about some of this stuff. And there are changes. Most of them have been communicated in some fashion or another, but some of the underlying things that took place and the conversations that happened to get us to those changes have not been publicly discussed. So we want an opportunity to do that.
For sure. So we'll start off with Delta McKenzie, 2 new targets, the Impala and the Mule Deer.
Yep.
And Josh, I want to reiterate again, for people of my archery ability, more big targets. You come out with these like Wolverines and Javelinas and Coyotes.
Well,
Forget that. Mule Deer.
We're working on a chipmunk and a groundhog. So we want to keep North American animals. So we're going to bring those out.
If you have an elk or a bison, I know Scott Parrott will hate hauling those 50 yards downrange. But sorry, Scott, that's what the people want. Big targets.
First shot of the week, groundhog inside of a stump, 50 yards for PJ. Yeah, we do have those new targets, the Impala and the Mule Deer. Probably the biggest change, that's bigger than just the 2 targets, which we change every year, is the sale of Delta McKenzie to Al Big Shot Targets. And, I've had a lot of questions about that. The working relationship there is going to stay the same. We're actually very excited. Al Pirelli him and I have met. We've had phone conversations. Nothing is changing. Their production is staying where it was. And so really the only conversation that I've had as far as changes from Al was like, what do we need changed? If you tell me that there's something, and of course it's the one complaint I hear all the time, get rid of those plastic legs. And he's like, okay, we'll work on that. And so there's some stuff, but we're not worried. It's a great relationship. I don't foresee any big changes. No foam. I've heard people saying, well, the foam's going to change. The targets are going to be more expensive, made cheaper. None of that's true. Production's going to stay the same. And the relationship there is great.
And it's cool that it went to somebody like Al, because if it could have gone to like some big, huge conglomerate company that doesn't care about archery.
There is nobody more passionate about 3D targets in the world than Al Pirelli.
Yeah.
If you check out the story of how Al Big Shot Targets came about, in a garage, innovating, wanting something better that he wasn't replacing every couple of weeks when him and his sons were shooting broadheads into him. So the guy literally started a need-based business to meet his need because of his passion in shooting targets. So I think the trajectory of ASA and Delta McKenzie's partnership into the future looks really bright. And so we're super excited about that change.
Awesome. And then do we want to jump right into phones? Archer's Mark.
You introduced me as the general manager for Competition Archer Media. The question I get most often is, what's it like working for PJ Riley? So you tell me what we're going to do, boss.
What is it like? Yeah, I like that. So the screenshot that I sent you was folks were talking about the no cell phones on the range.
Right.
That's actually nothing new.
Correct. And so actually the way that role came about and why it's being talked about is that role has actually always been in there. And when we wrap up a season, so, I've wrapped up 2 seasons and we've done this. So 2 seasons in my current position with ASA. We sit down at the end of the year with some of the ASA staff and our competition committee, which is made up of 6 professional archers. And we go through and revisit kind of everything. Issues that we had throughout the year that maybe we could clarify in roles, anything that needs discussed. And the cell phone role is one that I brought up in the meeting. It was like, I hate roles. That everybody that knows me knows, like, I don't like the confines of roles. And what I hate even more than roles is a role that's in writing and never enforced. Because that's just, it drives me nuts. And so I actually brought that role up. Like, this is something that we need to just get rid of this because it's not enforced. You have people using Archer's Mark. You've got people texting, social media, the whole 9 phones are present. To an extent, it wasn't like everybody was on them, but it's still, it just wasn't, it wasn't being enforced.
Right.
And so there was a lot of conversation around that. And I actually was surprised that the general consensus was, no, the rule needs to stay and needs to be enforced. Okay. If that's, and the two driving factors behind and keeping that rule in place were, number one, the integrity of the unknown game, right? That we wanted to protect that. You don't want people having their phones out, taking notes, sending texts, whatever. Yeah. And secondly, and this was, I think, an important one that, people talked about, was it'll change the dynamic of the ranges. And part of what makes ASA so special. And you can see it on a small scale. Like if you walk the practice range and then you walk a competition range, they are different. And you'll notice a difference. There's way more interacting taking place and conversations happening on a range because people don't have their phones out. So they're actually forced to socialize outside of social media and isolation on a phone. And, with that being said, we didn't want to lose the conversation, but we also didn't want to change the flow of the range either, where you've got to catch somebody that's, scrolling on their stool and say, hey, you're up. And then they got to put their phone away, come up. They got to get their brain back in the game. And there was just a fear that it would slow things down.
Slow it down, yeah.
It already takes a while to shoot something, so we want to keep it moving.
I have walked into many incredible conversations on the ranges where I'm like, what in the heck are you guys talking about?
I mean, yeah, I've walked by Jacob Marlowe's group a couple of times, like, where are we?
Yeah.
But
it would be sad to see that go away.
So with all of that said, though, it is a common sense rule, and there is inside of the rule, it's mentioned that you can use a phone with range officials, acknowledgement or approval. Yeah. And so again, common sense rule. So if you're a parent on a range and you've got a junior eagle shooting on the other side of the facility, you've got your phone. Of course you can take a phone call if you're needed at the junior eagle range. Right. We've got people, I talked to an individual who, it's rare, but it happens that work just has to get a hold of him. Again, not a problem. It's a common sense rule. We're not out there trying to beat people down and no phones or you're disqualified. And, so you have those issues, you just let a range official know. I mean, watching a baseball game, that happened last year, that's going to be a little, that's maybe not in that role. But for emergencies, work, family, of course, cell phones can still be used.
Was there any evidence of anyone on the range watching Shot of the Week, maybe looking for a couple tips?
No, I mean, maybe, but they seem to drop off after the pro talked about the highlights before you shot it. The other thing with cell phones,
the archer's mark is the issue.
Right. Well,
people use that.
I'll get to archer's mark after one other important thing. So there was a question brought up by the pros, like, hey, a lot of us are taking photographs so that we can make posts and tag our sponsors and do our obligations. Again, if a range official looks down a range and he sees a group of people standing there and somebody, he's not going to say anything. Take your pictures. What we don't want, though, is take your picture and then stand there and make your post. Get your pictures so that you can tag your sponsors, talk about day one, day two, whatever. Do that later. But if you're using it for photos or emergencies, it's a common sense rule.
You got to take picture of Robin Hoods. Anytime there's a Robin Hood, man, that picture blows up.
And so there are the leeways in for those things, common sense rules. Now, as far as archer's mark goes, we're not trying to put anybody out of business or take business away. My family has used archer's mark for the last 5 years. We did not start using our phone as the primary way to get those marks until last year. Previously, we had when you go in and you put in all your specs, you put in your measurements, and you go to the print page, you're getting 5 different sight tapes. Yeah, 5, because you get 2 of the main one that it says, and then you get 2 feet per second on either end of that. We'd print out that page, we would check the one, and then we would laminate the ones around it too, so that if humidity was high or we did make a change and we were a foot per second slower, we'd just take it out, put the other one on.
Right.
You can print out the cheat sheet where it has all your clicks. You can just screen grab and print that out. You can still use everything that you've done with Archer's Mark, just
on a
print it out.
Piece of paper.
And, and we had lots of discussions and flushed out like, okay, what are the flaws in that? And it's like, well, somebody said, well, what about not getting a sight tape until we're at an event? Because we know that happens. We come from an X event to an ASA and we've got to get our sight tape there. Okay, well, most of the hotels have a business room. Yep. And that's what one of the professional archers said, yeah, if I do that, I just go to the business room and I print it off at the hotel and then I double check it. So there are ways to continue to utilize Archer's Mark, if that's what you were doing. And that's been a relatively new thing in the last couple of years. And it was discussed. Should we keep cell phones just for that? And, at the end of the day, the 2 things that people kept coming back to are protecting the integrity and keeping the flow the same and conversations happening. And, with that being said, they wanted to keep the rule, and I agreed with that. And there was a question, the common sense argument that I've heard is you're trying to take everything tech with the app, right? You're directing everybody to their phones and then telling me you can't use it. Well, the large majority of ASA communications that come out on the app or the website, where you're going to get with that's something new this year. If you sign in, so when you download the app, create a login and sign in and enable push notifications. That way, if we send out when we send out target assignments to the pros in the morning, it'll pop right up on your home screen. So that's new in the app. But all that to say, with the communication of the app, we're utilizing that in non-shooting times. If there's an emergency, right, like we had in Coleman last year, which I don't ever want to talk about it again, but using that as an example where it just went to chaos in a matter of minutes.
0 to 100.
Guess what? We're not using the app to communicate that. Everybody's going to know what's going on. The range officials all have radios, stuff that is taking place in the moment. We've got ways to communicate that. The app was really designed for information leading into your shooting times, after your shooting times, tournament stuff that you need to know, and that's going to come out in a time frame where it doesn't matter if you're on the range or not. So yes, we are going towards technology, but for those 3 hours, we're not using phones.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And like with Archer's Mark, I think I remember being with Chris Perkins printing stuff out in the hotel for a tape that he just was making that day. So what else do we got? Let's talk about, so we're coming, let's shift gears to CAM now. Or was there anything ASA more that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I'm following your lead.
Let's shift to CAM for a second. So we're coming in now to, how many years is this with Sportsman's Channel? 3?
This is our third season with Sportsman's Channel.
And now we have our 2 classes that were new last year, Senior Known Pro, Women's Known Pro. As we know, we have our Sportsman's Channel lineup. Everything will be broadcast, but we only have room for 4 on the Sportsman's Channel, and that'll be Women's and Men's Known Pro, Women's and Men's Open Pro. Those are the classes there.
So the layout, we'll go through the layout first, and then I know you want to circle back and talk about viewership and data and some of the questions that came up last year. But
yes,
so the actual flow of the shoot down, we're going to start with Senior Pro, so an unknown class. That'll be that'll be the first class to shoot. Still available on YouTube, Facebook. There's a potential third party that I'm looking at, and we can't talk too much about that, but would drastically expand our views. Still free. No sign up needed, but it's affiliated with some large broadcasting entities that would be very good for us. Yeah. But we'll start that at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time with Senior Pro. That'll be found on YouTube and Facebook. Then we'll go Senior Known Pro, YouTube and Facebook. 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Sportsman's Channel broadcast starts, and we will go Women's Known Pro, Women's Pro, Open Pro. And that way we only have to do 1 target change in there because we're starting with an unknown, running through the 3 known classes, switch targets, move targets around so that we can go in and end with our unknown. And that really was the driving factor in how we got to that. The shooting order, it was so that we could keep it to a minimal of target switching, and we only have to do 1 that way. So that will be the process or the schedule for our shoot downs.
And the deal is not discriminating against anybody. The Sportsman's Channel, our window is set for time.
Correct.
Only have enough time for 4. We'd take all 6 if we could.
Right.
Just can't.
Right. And in I've had lots of conversations, especially with indoor season, where you get long broadcasts, and people are like, "Man, that's a long broadcast." If you're an archery nerd, you love it.
Yeah.
Right. You'll sit and watch 8 hours of it. If you're just kind of exploring it, it's a long broadcast, and the audience at large is not interested in a 5-hour broadcast.
Right.
And so I think Sportsman's Channel, that's the lens they look at it through. It's like, we're kind of reaching our maximum capacity of a live event here. And so we're limited to 4.
So when we started, there were only 4 classes. So all 4 classes were on there. Then when it expanded to and now there's 6 classes, 2 had to get bumped. Right. That's just the way it is. So initially we just kept the format the same and then allowed there to be a buildup of data. And it just showed that the senior and senior known were the least viewed. That doesn't mean they're not important. That doesn't mean we don't love all those people. It just meant in the outside world, those were the two that were least consumed.
And I think in that, we got to make sure, yes, there's a lot of history in those classes.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are legends in those classes.
No doubt.
There's
Tim Gillingham is in those classes.
Tim Gillingham, Jeff
If you
Hopkins,
think we don't
right.
want to put Tim Gillingham
Right.
on TV, you're nuts.
So we understand what those people have done for the sport. We understand that there is an audience for them, and by and large, the viewership numbers are on social media anyway. So
Right.
we're not really taking away viewership from those classes. So I just wanted to make sure we cover that. Like we get it. We're still providing those people with a platform, those individuals, those classes with a platform to reach the audiences and celebrate all that they've accomplished in driving 3D, specifically 3D archery, to what it is today. With that said, you have to look at viewership, because you and I were talking, and I said you have to view two separate audiences, right? There is the archery community, the archery geeks, the nerds, the PJ Rileys that just want to consume every piece of content that's out there in archery. But then you have to look at the audience that isn't here yet, right? And what is going to be most appealing to them? And you've got to, and in that, there's almost a sub-level of the next generation of archers, right? And trying to create content, and this goes bigger than TV. This is how we analyze every piece of content that we put on, whether it's social media, Facebook, YouTube, whether it goes on the Sportsman's Channel. It's walking that fine line between satisfying all of the technological information that the archery community wants and creating something exciting enough that the next generation tunes in and doesn't tune out right away. And you say, just do both, do it all. Well, you can't for several reasons. You've got financial limitations, you've got human resources limitations, and then you also have platform limitations. Kyle was always yelling at us like, yeah, we could do that, but that's an extra piece of content that's going to take away from this, which is more valuable. And Kyle is, the video guy, so much more than that. But Kyle helps us kind of rein that in of doing everything to keeping a flow that keeps audiences watching what we need them to see, and things don't get lost. So you take that all into consideration. There is a lot of juggling that takes place, as far as like, hey, getting out the technology, we can do this. We can get the scores out here, which by and large is only viewed by the archery community, right? Like, and that's, you can see it in the engagement and the numbers and the resources. It's really hard to fudge stuff online. People do it, but you can get the facts. There's enough information out there now to get what truly is engaging and what the true audience is. And then trying to be creative, do new things, exciting things that are going to captivate an audience that maybe tunes in for the first time or gets at younger people.
And let's talk about that for a second, the scoring. So the way we do it is we score, we go to the pro ranges. They shoot Friday, they shoot Saturday. 20 targets. We score every class, every 5 targets.
Correct.
Which is a feat of itself.
Yeah, let's talk about how that happens, because people are like, well, just give us scores every target. Well, so there's some things, and moving forward, I'm optimistic. I have an optimistic hope that we can make a change. I mean, live scoring is still something I would love to do. We tested multiple platforms last year. There's several hiccups. One with the way ASA runs. I mean, we let people sign up, as long as they can. We never close registration.
Right.
So as long as somebody gets to registration trailer with enough time to register and get to the range before that first arrow shot, people can sign up, and I think that's something that makes us unique. But with live scoring, where a lot of that stuff is pre-programmed and pushed to tablets, there's not a platform out there yet that has it simple enough. And yes, if you've not been to ASA, you're like, oh, that absolutely happens, because we do it at the Lancaster Classic. It happens at every.
Yes.
You can move 1 or 2 people fairly easily. ASA, we're sometimes, and we actually had a scoring platform out there, and they were like, oh, we've done that, we've got it. When they saw the amount of people moved,
right,
in a short amount of time.
Even people who are already pre-registered,
correct,
they get out on the range,
yes,
and the range official says, hey, you 2 groups combine together and move over to this target.
Or just, hey, once we see the way things lay out, and you can't, there is no amount of preparation that prepares you for that, because you don't know until you get out there and see everything full. And so the range official might say, hey, I've got some empty targets over here. If I shuffle everyone, we're going to move through this thing faster. And so he may move like 5 or 6 groups to a different target. So you potentially could be moving 50, 60 people inside of that online scoring system, and there's just not a platform yet that
right before it starts.
This has to happen in minutes. Not, it can't take 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Like, it needs to be instantaneous as we move it. So we're just not there yet. There are great companies out there working towards. I mean, I had long conversations with INCO, even incorporating their LiDAR, their laser technology that does the automated scoring.
Right.
There are several platforms working towards that. That's the first issue. The second issue is bigger than the first even, and that is we go to locations where there's just no cell phone service. And, we've heard everything. Well, like, I can go to the Arctic Circle and call my family. There's a big difference between
not on social media.
There's a big difference between making a phone call and a text and sending data.
Right.
And so that we're working on that. And as the ASA team looks at new venues, one of the primary focuses is like, we've got to have solid internet connection, which becomes difficult when you're looking for 800 to 900 acres.
Yeah.
You're typically in a remote place,
or a military base that doesn't want communications.
Right. Or, I mean, in Fort Benning, as soon as you see that first plane take off, forget it. Like, it's just over. So you've got all of that in live scoring. But to come back to what you said, we score every 5 targets. We can't do any more than that, because in a place like Benning, this is how it works. We can't even send pictures from each range. So you or myself are having to visit each of the ranges. If you've never been to an ASA course layout and seen how it's laid out, we've got 2 places where it is over a mile between the 2 pro ranges. And that's a mile walking. And then you take into consideration at a place like Coleman, where you've got to go through 3 amateur ranges to get to this. So you're taking a celebrity like PJ Riley, telling him he's got to walk a mile and then be stopped for selfies, photos, and everything else. And PJ loves that. I'm not complaining about the people doing that, but I'll throw a microphone in his hand. I'll be like, pretend like we're talking. Like, we're working. So you have to get all the pictures, and without a way to share them, one person's got to travel to all those. And then we've had times in Fort Benning where you've got to go out to the parking lot, jump in a car, drive 3 miles out to the highway where you've got enough cell phone service that you can upload those photos.
Send it, yeah.
And even if and people say, well, don't do photos, just type in the score. It's still data. It's still more than you just typing a sentence in there and uploading it. And you can't even do that, at Fort Benning.
And it's 6 classes every 5 targets.
Right, so you're putting out 5 pieces of information or 6 pieces of information. And so we'll drive out to the highway, get them uploaded. Well, by the time you get back, last year in Fort Benning, I was on the Brown Polaris, and I would race all the ranges back. And fortunately there, I didn't have to go all the way to the highway. I could do it in the Polaris, but I would take the Polaris out to where I'd get cell phone service. And by the time I would get back, they're already scoring their 10 targets.
5, yeah.
So there is no way to do more than 5. And
the thing to remember is, especially on the first day, and especially in a place like Foley, which has the biggest numbers, that known pro range may have 100 shooters. And let's be realistic, 80 of them could shoot all 12s on the first 5 targets.
That scoring on day one is just it's an insurmountable, and the scorers, bless their hearts, they're always trying to put everybody's name up there who's in contention. I'm like, listen.
You could say, oh, you know who to go follow. No,
like
you really don't.
If you've got 20 people that are 10 up after the first start, don't write everybody up. Well, it's the only time their name gets on the board.
It's their minute of fame.
I understand that, but if they've shot 6 up and there's 62 people ahead of them that have shot 10 and 8 up, they're not on the board. And so that first day, especially in known pro, it's just, you can't, as it goes on, okay, I've got to go to these 5 groups.
Yeah.
But that day one, man, you've got to go to every
never
target,
know.
all 20 targets, and then get it uploaded. And by the time you get back, I mean, you were waiting for me last year. Like they would all be done at Benning till I got back.
So the scoring posts alone, just scoring posts in our feed of Facebook over a weekend is going to be 48 posts. No, more than that. 6
times 4 is 24.
Oh,
times 2 is 48. So
48 posts, just scoreboards.
Right.
So if you're like somebody who's not really into the scoring, you want to, see what's going on. That's kind of boring.
Right.
Just nothing. So that's where we mix in photos, videos, stuff like that. So
short form content. And
just to break that up so it's not just a river of nothing but scoreboards.
If you are somebody who...
if you're somebody
who...
it's there.
It's there. And
the information is there.
Here's a pro tip from a guy who doesn't use social media. If you want to go on to Cam's Facebook page and you only want to see scores and you don't want to have to weed through the videos and the other contents that are getting thousands and thousands of views, there is a cheat. Just go click on photos. Because if you click on photos, it's going to take you just to the uploaded photos and you'll be able to see the scores right there. And so that is until we can work out a live scoring system that works 100% of the time, because to me, having live scoring that is not 100% accurate is worse than not having it at all. When I'm trying to follow a tournament and stuff's not updating, it's good. I would rather just give me the picture of the scores, and that's what we're going to do.
Credit to the ASA, because CAM used to do that just ourselves, and now the ASA folks do the scoring on the ranges.
Biggest benefits of me being an ASA.
But now it's as solid as it's been since I've been there, in that literally every 5 targets, I can't recall us missing. If it's missing, it's somebody forgetting to post a picture, which I've done that. And, and then you catch it on the next one. But there's scoring every 5 targets. You can follow the competition beginning to end.
Yeah. All right. So that's pet peeve number 1 from social media from PJ. What else do you have on social media, PJ, that you've seen that you want to address?
What do I want to address? I can't remember.
Do I need to go back through the screenshots?
No, the scoring I wanted to talk about, just to get folks to realize what goes into that. Because if you're just looking on your phone, you're thinking, oh yeah. And we've had discussions with lots of folks about, you can do this and how can you do that? And as you and I who have been there, it's not as easy as it seems.
and I'm like, by and large, I'll say this: a lot of this stuff, I'm not frustrated or upset in any way by the comments and the suggestions for scoring.
Sure, right?
I agree largely with everything that's being said. We've got to figure that out. And in the meantime, we have a workable solution. And the way to, if that's the only thing you're interested in, again, just go Cam's Facebook page, click photos, and that's all you'll see. You might get 1 or 2 random photo galleries, or we've posted pictures of people shooting, but the scores will all be there in photo form. And so, all that to say, we get it. I agree, but man, it's a process to get there when you're dealing with technology.
Yeah. And, it's funny you mentioned to deal with technology. To deal with the flip side of that, I went right back to Minden, of just getting out to, I forget what ranges they were. They were the ones that were off by themselves, where last year it was like a mud pit beyond.
They call
mud
it the hog wallow out there.
The hog wallow. We had to go through that every time to go in and out of those ranges to post scores, get scores. That was probably I had knee-high boots on, and there were places I had to avoid because I'd have been over my boots.
Let's not talk about that, though, either. I'm not telling people about the mud. By and large, last year, you could walk to everything.
Yes.
And even in Coleman, where we had all the rain, they got that cleaned up really well. So I don't have to bring up the mud, PJ. Jeez.
I love the mud.
It's not ASA without it.
Exactly.
The fact is, we're going outside and you can just embrace the elements, and that's part of what makes it fun.
Yeah, so at CAM, we don't really have much changes this year. Something we did start last year that proved to be just killer was figure out a way to do like live feed out on the range. and Kyle, our mastermind,
You just made him, his face is turning red. He's
sitting
like, don't,
back there.
don't talk about that. Don't promise people anything. It's all being said in his eyes.
And it's funny because you did mention benning. That was where we first tested it last year, and it just did not
You
work.
couldn't even, so the way Kyle, and he can correct this if I'm wrong, this is, Kyle is a master at the technology. My limited understanding, he couldn't even get the RF frequency from a camera to go into the switcher.
Correct.
Which is in eyesight.
Right
Like,
next to it.
So
Yes.
everything has to be hardwired there because it literally screws up every frequency that he tried. And in that scenario, he's still, all of that work, all that preparation goes into it. The stuff all ends up out there.
We did it.
And he films it, and we're going to put it up. We're going to put it up when we can.
Yeah.
And get that content out there, because that is what he's done on the range is something I think archery's needed for so long. Instead of just out there with a cell phone or even a camera and posting. I mean, he brought multi-cameras into it. You could see people shooting their qualifying arrows. He'd have a target camera. And I'm super excited as we get better at figuring that out, and we're able to support Kyle and the team out there doing that, where that can go, because I think that is something, I mean, the audience last year loved that.
Yeah.
And so
It's cool.
that's exciting. Yeah. I don't know from Cam if there's anything else new.
No, broadcast, same as always, we're going to do that. We've got Jason Will, our producer, who makes miracles happen.
He's working on some changes. I think one of the here's a change. And I don't know, this is probably one I shouldn't say either, because then people expect it and these guys want to kill us. But we've actually, have updated some of the graphic stuff needed. And I know one of the biggest complaints was always the score. It was my pet peeve. The scores during the final broadcast wouldn't adjust.
Right.
Because of the limitations of the graphics system. And I think you and I talked on the last podcast where that was a $36,000 investment to upgrade just the graphics package. With some of the new stuff that has come out, we've figured kind of a workaround that, and we're super optimistic that this year our graphics will actually change. The leader will be on top, and they'll be in order. And so it's incremental things like that. And that when I say it, it's like, well, that doesn't sound like that big a deal. But when you're inside that trailer and you see the amount of work and the hours it takes to figure something like that out, where, okay, we don't have the $36,000 to invest in it. How do we make this work? And the time and energy that goes in, that Kyle and Jason, the entire team, put into figuring out, how to get pictures of our shooters up there, how to put more stats out, and all of that stuff. I had a conversation at the Classic with a gentleman who is like, if archery ever goes to sports betting, this guy's he's going to cash out on day one. I don't even know how he gets all the information, but he has so many statistics of archers, how many times they've been in a bronze medal match, who they've shot against, how many arrows hit, whether it was a 10 or 12. He's got all of this data. And he's like, oh, it'd be so great to implement that into the broadcast when somebody comes up, like how many times Dan and Levi have shot against each other, what percentage of the time Levi's won, what percentage of the time Dan's won. We actually have that information. We just don't have a way inside the current system to get it out.
And so it's fast.
It's playing with all of that stuff.
And while you're doing everything else.
And when you say like, hey, this would be awesome, we by and large agree. We've got most of that stuff. We've got the ideas. It's figuring out how to implement them with limited resources, both in finances and people. And so we're making those changes. That's not an excuse to stay stagnant.
Right.
But it's kind of a request of like, hey, stay patient. We're seeing these things. And by all means, keep the ideas coming, because somebody might have an idea that we don't know. But if we don't implement it, it doesn't mean we didn't like the idea. It just means that we're working inside of our current
working
format.
on it.
So,
because how many cameras do we run during a broadcast?
Cameras, we have five target cameras.
5 target cameras.
We have the 2 stationary TV cameras on the side. We have a handheld, so we're at 8. We've got the jib camera at 9, and then we usually have an elevated camera at 10. And this year we're playing with either swapping out a 10th or adding an 11th. Gotcha. I mean, I tell people at the Lancaster Classic, Cam, and Lancaster kind of brings Cam in to produce that. We had a team of 32 people that rotated in and out because the broadcasts were so long. At ASA's, we're between cameramen, personalities, people inside the trailer, we're looking at a staff of 18 people. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes. You know, if there's ever a time that the illustration of like work like a duck, on top of the surface, everything's smooth, and then underneath you're paddling like, I can't say.
Yes.
But that illustration is Cam when it is time to live stream.
Yeah.
And so, we work with a great group of people. You know, we work with Jason and Kyle, who understand their limitations but don't throw their hands up. They work to figure out a solution to the problem. And so
that's real. I've never, you just don't hear them say, well, we can't do that.
Right.
It's, well, let me see. How maybe can we do that?
Right.
And if Jason says, that's not going to work, well, it probably isn't going to work.
And I've only heard Jason say that like twice. So, and you know, if these guys, they will not say we can't do it, but it will take them time to figure it out with our current system.
Yeah.
And you know, I want to make sure that I continue to stress that, and we talk about that, because we all look at things and this is bigger than archery. In all of life, you look at things like there's so much opportunity, and that's true. But how do we get there? And we've got a team of people here that don't give up. You know, they'll figure it out. It's just going to take some time, because we are a smaller.
Yeah.
We're a smaller organization. You know, what the archery as a whole is a smaller. So we've got to figure. Yeah, the NFL did some cool stuff at the Super Bowl. How do we take and implement that? Because we're not the NFL.
Nope.
And so, that from a cam side, you know, I think we've making some changes and working forward, and excited about what 2024 has to offer.
And our sponsors, you know, our cam sponsors, you know, they're the ones who make it possible. As you mentioned, we have people cost money, equipment costs money, everything costs money. Everybody knows that. But, you know, you see a lot of those sponsors for cam who are also ASA sponsors, you know, they've got limitations as well. You know, hey, we love them, and they will spread that money, even though it's the same people sponsoring here, sponsoring here, sponsoring there. We can't thank them enough, because you can't do it.
Right. And that first, absolutely. Thanks to everybody that has supported this industry for so long. But that's going to lead to a conversation on social media of we've got to get non-endemics. And
be nice.
So let's take a minute and talk about that. And that, by and large, falls on the shoulders of the organizations. And I can say that now without throwing anybody under the bus, because I represent
you are the organization.
one of those organizations. And there's a bunch of things that need to take place for that to happen. And I can, I'll put a little teaser out for 2025. I mean, so when we're talking about ASA changes, two of the things that I see, that I was actually in the office the last 2 days and talking to the team there, is like two things that are on the foremost of my brain are, we've got to grow the sponsorship base to get payouts where they need to be able to pay for the things that we want to do. And that's going to take non-endemic sponsors. And the way we get there is by continuing to build our brand as an organization and adding value to the non-endemic world, and finding, and we've made great strides. Was looking forward to 2024, but and you know, to people that I have had conversations about, really the holdup there was making sure we get it right. Because what I want at ASA is not somebody just to come in and write a fat check, and then after a year or two, like, that was
whatever,
great, and they move on.
Right.
It's building for success in the future, because the reality is, once you get one, if they're happy, they've got business connections. Or if it's a private investor or businessman, he's got friends in the same world that he lives in. And you want him to be like, man, this was great, right? And there were just some things like, we could have taken checks, but I didn't feel confident about the future. And so continuing to build upon that so that it is a partnership that has a sustainable future, to where they're happy, we're utilizing their money. So that's priority number one. Priority number two, which should probably be number one, because you've got to build that brand, bring the awareness in, and so that you have value to those. And those are the two things at ASA that we just want to put all of our focus on, while holding great events and doing all of that. And so there's some really exciting stuff. You know, I'll tease this. We're having conversations. There's a big meeting next month about taking ASA international. and looking at 2025 as potentially having our first international ASA Pro-Am. To grow our audience, there is an increasing interest around the world in what we do. I mean, our phones, we get calls from clubs and organizations. How do we get this here? And so looking at that, teasing that out, and somebody said, well, what does that do? I'm like, well, we can say this on a podcast. Like, if I say 10 years down the road, where do I want ASA to be? How cool would it be to have ASA US, like North America, ASA Europe, ASA Africa? They're all running their own series of pro-ams.
Yeah.
Then you take your shooter of the years or your top finishers at the classics, and you have a world championship in 3D, in ASA style 3D archery.
Who are my two friends who come from the UK every year?
Oh yeah,
Tony and I can't
man, you're
remember.
putting me on the bus now because they're going to be mad that I didn't.
I'll see them
because they'll be
in
Foley.
the first one. Yeah.
They always come bearing gifts.
Have
as well,
ASA UK.
Yeah. And so, there's a lot of exciting stuff coming forward. Again, it doesn't move as fast as I would like it to. I get frustrated, but when you're looking at it like, I don't want a one-off event. If we're going to do an international event, I don't want it to be a one and done. I want to have a structure in place to where, we can replicate it, to other countries can look at it, and we've got something we can repeat, as well as something that draws interest to clubs in the area so that we can benefit the local clubs of, the UK, the ASA grows in its brand awareness there and does that. So again, those are incremental. Those are big things, but it's incremental changes that will get us there, and we're working towards that, and it does take time.
Registration fees. We wanted to talk about that as well.
Wait, we or you?
Me.
So, all right. Well, so, some of the screenshots that come about this year, there was an increase in the pro registration fees. So went up $45 on a $350 registration fee. One of the biggest pieces of misinformation associated with registration fee is payouts. Well, they're going to keep all the money. I guarantee that's not going to payouts. That's false. And you can fact check this. So anything that comes in at a tournament designated under registration, instantly 65% of that goes into payouts. 10% goes to shooter of the year, rookie of the year. So you've got 75% there. So 75% of that $45 automatically goes back to the shooter. Well, then there's more on top of that, because we take out for the payback, right? And that changes. So I can't give you a specific percentage.
Yeah,
because
depends on class.
That changes depending on class and amount of participation. But you've got another percentage of that money that goes into the paybacks, and that's, if you're not familiar with ASA, we pay the top 20% of the class in classes with larger registration, but then we go and pay 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50. People get paid in there, and that people, the question always, well, people game that. You can't game that, because most people aren't good enough to do. I don't know that anybody, unless you get Rain Man out there, is good enough to do the math. Like, okay, where's the payback line going to be? What scores do I need to shoot to make sure that in my 10 people that I'm going to, it's really tough to game that system. So if you look at that, I mean, it's really a small number of that 45% that goes back, or $45 that goes back to ASA, and I think you and I figured it out. And it was like, if you take into consideration the $305 that they were paying, deduct all the payback money there, it was something like 11% increase overall. Well, and I've said this, and I'll say it as direct as I can here. Like, if you don't think the cost of doing business in the last 3 years has gone up more than 11% per person, again, we get back to where we started. Like, there's no. How do we have a conversation about that?
My car insurance just went up 30% with no accidents.
Right. And the other thing with
That's a different
paybacks, the other
podcast.
thing that I think paybacks, something that's important to hit there, because the amateurs don't make near amount the money. The payback structure for ASA is the exact same. So 75% comes off the top for pros, 75% comes off top for amateurs. 75% of $60 is a lot different than 75% of $350.
Right.
But what the ASA is contributing back percentage-wise is identical, whether you're shooting in the high school open class or the pro class.
Yeah, and as we were talking, the sponsors are there to support everybody. It's the pros primarily that draw them out, that bring them out, to represent their companies. Pros are there. That's what's on TV.
Well, a lot of times the pros are running the booths as well.
Tim Gillingham.
Right. You know, or they're in there assisting
Andy Callaway.
in the booths.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them.
And the sponsors want to come because again, I try to think, I'm trying to help you out here and save you from late night screen texting me. So I could see one of the things that is going to be said about that is like, well, no, the sponsors aren't going to come for the pros because the pros aren't going to buy anything. That's true. Right?
Yes.
The sponsors are coming
Correct.
to interact with all of the shooters and show new products and do sales, whatever it is. They want to connect to the biggest audience possible. But that pro class does drive the awareness of the event that brings out the people, and that's sports across the board. You know,
Yeah,
and it comes back.
nothing.
It comes back to the whole social media thing for me, and the having mixed conversations where it's like we want to be like other sports. Well, okay, well, then we've got to make some adjustments because we're structured very differently, and some of that we don't want to change. I mean, one of the things that makes archery great, it's one of the only individual events that I can think of outside of running. But the last time, here's a story for you. I ran a marathon in 2021. Not 2021, I'd have died. 2001. But even there, it was an Olympic trial. And before you started, and I wasn't running the Olympic trial. I was running with the slow people.
Yeah.
But even there was a separation because we started at 9. They all started at 8. So while there was an intermingling of the athletes, they didn't compete together. I mean,
and a marathon is different. You're not going to have amateurs at a track meet.
But I just, throwing out like it's the only sport similar. I mean, archery is the only individual sport where you're actually competing alongside a pro. You know, ASA, we've got separate ranges, but you're still in the vendor village, on the bags, the practice ranges. You shoot indoor shoots, you're on a line with somebody. So there is a distinction there that we don't want to change.
And there are classes who shoot, they're not shooting with the pros, but they shoot right behind the pros.
Right.
Same range,
Yeah.
Nothing gets moved. Sometimes some things get moved.
That adds an element that we can't change, don't want to change certain things there.
Yeah.
But there's stuff as an organization. When I say organization, I'm talking the organization of archery, competitive archers. That if we want to be more like other sports, then we've got to make some changes to be more like them. And when you're standing on the hill, we've got to be more like other sports. We got to be more like other sports. Then you can't be opposed to the incremental changes that are going to get us in those lines.
Yeah.
You might not like them, but step back, look at it from 30,000 feet and say, okay, this is moving us in the right direction. This is going to bring in more sponsors. It's going to bring in more shooters. And it's not about, the other thing I see online all the time is about the money. It's not about the money. I mean, yes, there are a lot of businesses that depend on the money from competition archery. There's a business model there. But more concerning for me is the sustainability of this sport that we love.
Right.
And if we're not bringing in a new audience, we're not bringing in young shooters or appealing to the next generation, this thing doesn't have a future.
Well, and to me, I always think too, like Greg Summers and the Summers family there at True Ball Excel. Man, there's nothing happens in archery that they're not putting money towards. But they're not going to do that if their business doesn't make money. Right. I mean, that's, if you break it down to its simplest form, that's a job.
Right.
And they have to make money doing it. So yeah, in one sense, they have to make money. That's just life. There's nothing we can do about that. But
and whether you're a for-profit business or a non-profit business, you still have to pay the people that get the work done. Right?
Exactly.
You're a non-profit business. There's still employees that are making a salary to keep that organization afloat and steward the money that go into the.
But think about how much more money True Ball Excel would have if they didn't put so much back. Now there's a reciprocal thing there, and that's irrelevant because the Summers aren't going to do that. But they don't have to do that, but they do. Because, if you don't think Greg Summers is a fan of archery.
Right. And so you touched on something that I've had a lot of private conversations about. So when I'm talking non-endemic money, first and foremost, I want to get the payouts to where, and I've told sponsors, it's like, my goal at ASA is to have enough payout that a shooter wants to come whether they get contingency or not. That takes the pressure off the manufacturer, right? Like you can still pay contingency to get that person shooting your bow for the marketing. But that piece aside, what makes non-endemics important, ASA should be running and facilitating our own shoots, right? the money that comes in from sponsorship and the way archery largely is set up now is organizations, us included, depend on those sponsorship dollars to even get the shoot off the ground.
Right.
That doesn't happen in other pro sports on TV, right? The Super Bowl, NFL is funding the Super Bowl. Why? Because they've got a product that they're going to bring in a ton, billions of dollars in marketing, advertising, and viewership. We're not there yet. But what bringing non-endemic sponsorship in does, that you said it, kind of relieves the pain of some of those manufacturers that are supporting everything. ASA is going to run a Pro-Am. We funded the Pro-Am. We're reaching X number of people. Your shooters are here. You pay for marketing. Now a manufacturer can focus on what is best for their marketing plan instead of having to contribute here, and here to get just to keep the whole thing afloat.
Right.
I look at that and archery, seems to be sustaining itself that way. And I think it probably could, but not if we want the growth that we need to experience. We've got to relieve the burden from the community itself, fund things, grow a product that they want to put money into because it makes sense to advertise on that platform. And there are models out there in Major League Fishing. If you really dig into the history of how they got to where they are, they had the same growing pains. And they, started where guys were spending $8,000-9,000 to go fish a tournament, might win $1,500. And they made some pretty significant changes in their payouts and sponsorship and what that looked like. And honestly,
you offer $100,000,
people are coming.
They're showing up,
right? And so then what that enabled, and some of the fishing industry actually looked at that as a negative at first. Like, well, wait a minute, you're bringing this in and pulled out, but then saw what Major League Fishing turned into. Is like, wait, if I want to stay relevant in this industry, I got to get back involved because that's a major platform for advertising and marketing. And then it's a great relationship moving forward because we're going to run our event and here's where you can market and advertise. And so that comes back to, the two things at ASA that I want to focus on are non-endemic sponsors, growing our social brand and awareness to make it valuable for them to come in, but doing that in a systematic way that is structured for sustainability into the future. And I think that has implications and ripple effect through the entire industry. Let me just hit on, before we're done.
Okay.
Let me just hit on that Metropolis and what happened with Tennessee and London and Metropolis.
Oh, yes.
So we thought we were going to lose Metropolis, and we talked about that. But what happened in Clarksville, Tennessee, we're still working with that. It's an awesome city. We did have to make a change in October because when we visited, and I actually visited it early in the year, we walked it off. Scott laid out his ranges, and we're like, man, this place is awesome. The town was great, and I talked it up, right? It was really going to be good. Scott went back in October, and there was I had to make a little change in the layout of the land. And when they did that, we still had enough land to do it, but we were going to be moving 2 ranges further away. We were going to have to implement like a trolley system, or shuttle system, like we do in Foley and Coleman. And when we did that, it impacted 3 or 4 ranges that Scott had laid out because when he initially laid them out, we were not using the road. And so to get the shuttle system going, we had to open the road up. Yeah. And that affects, for safety reasons, affected 3 of the 4 ranges. He was there because he was flagging so they could start cutting lanes in. He called me and said, I think I can make it work, but I'm not 100% certain. And I said, it's October. That's not good enough. Like, I need 100% certainty that you can get the ranges in there in a safe manner so that we can if we have to make a change, we make a change now in October instead of in March when people have already booked. And so we made the decision because of just some change in the layout there to forego that and continue to work with that community and try to get in there. So London graciously, they were excited to get us back in there. They're working on some changes for additional ranges and stuff because one of the problems there was limitation with attendance. And so things have worked out. We're excited about the year, but that is why I was in Vegas and got a bunch of questions on that. So I wanted to make sure we hit why that happened.
Yeah. And it's not a simple, Paris, Texas. Hey, we loved that place. It just got too big for it. They just couldn't handle it anymore. So then Minden came in, which there's untold room for growth there. But yeah, getting those new sites online, it's not simple.
Right.
I know, as we've talked about, just Go here. Go to a state park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
it
another
doesn't quite
thing on
work
there,
that way.
Well, since we're talking about it, and Kyle hasn't cut us off, I mean, he might have turned off the recording, but one of the things that gets suggested a ton, and I just had this conversation regarding Pennsylvania, because everybody's like, well, you're in Pennsylvania, we need an ASA in Pennsylvania. I'm like, it's not going to happen. Why? Because there's nowhere here to have one, right? When I can find the property I need, the infrastructure is not present. If I've got the infrastructure, the property's not there. And so the suggestion came up, why don't you use a resort? There's a couple problems with resorts, and it doesn't really come down to money. What it boils down to is we build relationships. The most important thing in this whole system is the relationships we have with host towns. And why that becomes important was highlighted in Coleman last year. Because had we been somewhere where the city was not as involved as they are, and they're involved because they understand what ASA brings to their economic value and the sustainability of their town throughout the year. So they're invested because they want us there. So when we got 5 inches of rain in 3 hours, had we been anywhere else, most of our facilities would have been the same way. But had we been at a resort or a private piece of property where we didn't have the community, we would have had to cancel the biggest shoot of the year. But because of that relationship with the town, they were able to figure out the parking headache. And while for the archers, yes, it was less than ideal, we were still able to hold a shoot.
Still went off.
If you're not familiar with what happened, they had us park at the local high school. They lined up public transportation, got 5 school buses and a couple public transportation buses. They did that all within a short window of time to make sure that we could go on.
Because the parking would have been in a field that
was eliminated. We
wouldn't have worked.
With 5 inches of rain in 3 hours, you couldn't have parked. And so if you go to a resort where you're paying a fee to be there, or you're going to private property, and the problem with private property is the towns help us a lot. They do a lot of improvements, and they help us throughout the year because it benefits. They can justify it because it's benefiting public property, and knowing that, okay, this event's coming and going to bring income to our restaurants, hotels, gas stations. You pay a fee at a resort and something like that happens, the amount of help that you're going to get. I mean, we had people on the ranges with chainsaws because trees came down, and it works because of relationships.
Yeah.
And when you go to some of those other facilities, the relationship is not the same. Their desire to help is not the same. And so it's a monumental task to build those relationships, find the ideal properties. And so that's a constant. And, somebody asked, we're looking at a new property somewhere. I won't tell you where. But they ask, like, what's the time frame, and are you looking at other venues? And I'm like, yeah, right now, like 8 others. Because most of them aren't going to pan out. Like, we're always looking.
Yeah.
And it's good to have stuff in your back pocket in case something would happen. You have a catastrophe or tornado somewhere, or what, a natural disaster, and you can't go somewhere, or relationship changes. And so we are always looking. So
it's good to see the interest. Obviously Northeast, we hear it a lot from Ohio, PA, Michigan, New York. You got to bring the ASA up here. Well, can't say it won't happen.
Right. And then I tell people, my goal is for it to grow that way. But the way that we're going to do that is, instead of just throwing a dart at a wall and like, hey, let's go to this, it's to work. And I've given Scott this charge with the federation. Man, you've got to grow the federation. You need to be bringing in more clubs, growing attendance at state qualifiers, growing attendance at state championships, because then we have data. We can look at, okay, Montana gets brought up a lot. So you look at Montana and say, okay, they've got 400 people coming to their state championship. The bordering states also have several hundred people coming. That's a safe bet because we know we've got a foundation there to build upon. And so for me, it's, again, take a step back, figure out the strategy to move forward. What are the safe steps? Grow the federation, grow the interest in those areas. And, the Northeast is a big one. We have a lot of interest there. Again, it comes down to finding the property. But I mean, how cool would it be one day to have like ASA east of the Mississippi, like the AFC and NFC, right? Like you've got the ASA East, everything east of the Mississippi, ASA West, everything west of the Mississippi. They're running their tournaments, and then you come together at the end of the year for a conference championship or a national championship.
I'm going to go on record, however, Josh, and say I don't support an ASA coming to Pennsylvania. I already know the food. How does that help me out?
What if I put one behind Shady Maple?
Nah, that's still, I can go there anytime. On that, Josh, we appreciate your time. Looking forward to the season. It's just always fun. 3D, we're going outside. We've all been cooped up. I think everybody from between Vegas, the Classic, all this stuff, everybody's been sick at least once from one of those things. Outdoors, fresh air.
Sunshine, warm weather, fresh air.
We're ready.
And we're looking forward to a great weekend. Hope to see everybody there.
All right, folks, that is another episode of the Competition Archery Media Podcast. Josh, thanks for your time.
Thanks, PJ.
Folks, the Competition Archery Media Podcast you can find on all the platforms wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Thanks for being here.